Rhetoric is a technique of using language effectively and persuasively in spoken or written form. It is an art of discourse wherein various methods of convincing, influencing, or pleasing an audience are used. It utilizes compositional techniques like figures of speech. It becomes a device in rhetoric when it is aimed at persuading the readers or listeners. Rhetoric is a tool for writers and orators for convincing their readers and listeners about their point of view. Rhetoric can be visual, auditory, or linguistic, aiming to evoke the audience's senses towards the messenger's thoughts, ideas, and views. Persuasion is another technique that writers use to present their ideas through arguments with reason and logic in order to influence an audience. Like rhetoric, it is an art of discourse, effective speaking and writing in which writers make their opinions believable to the audience through logic by evoking emotions and providing their own credibility. Persuasion is not only used in literature but also in political speeches, conferences, courtrooms, and advertisements. Through this, the messenger expresses their feelings and opinions by appealing to his audience emotionally and rationally. In addition, it helps students to unearth certain reasons in favor of their points of view and gives them a chance to research facts linked to their views. While developing an understanding of how writing can change and influence their thoughts and actions, students can understand the nature of persuasive work.
Rhetoric and persuasion share similarities in elements, attributes, and objectives. They use the same voice and message in that they both seek to address and persuade their audience publicly. Both of these are characterized by the same attributes, persuasion and persistence in their message. Their common objective is to persuade or convince the audience. However, rhetoric differs in a way in that the purpose of a rhetoric discourse is to spark a debate or an exchange in opinions rather than an answer or to directly persuade. It is from this discourse that people form their own opinions and become persuaded. In classic rhetoric, oratory was divided in three branches: judicial oratory, which purpose is to accuse or defend; deliberative oratory, which serves to exhort or dissuade; and epidictic oratory, which serves to praise or blame. Meanwhile, persuasion serves to affect people in a way such that is direct and to the point. Persuasion is distinctly characterized by the belief, enthusiasm, knowledge, empathy, energy, and consistency which can be found in the delivery of its message, which is meant to either persuade or dissuade the audience. As such, it is supposed to appeal to emotions, logic and reason, and credibility and ethics. Meanwhile, rhetoric is planned, adapted to an audience, reveals human motives, typically responsive, and concerned with contingent issues. The objectives of a rhetoric discourse is to inform the audience and to motivate them, while persuasion aims to stimulate the audience and to actuate them into a certain way or belief.
In literature, speeches, advertisements, discourse, we use rhetoric and persuasion. It is a form of social influence in which an audience is intentionally encouraged to adopt an idea, attitude, or course of action by symbolic means, and this challenges the receiver's critical thinking. It is a technique that is so common that sometimes one won't even know that it's being used. It is a technique that uses logic, reason, rationality, arguments, and even emotion to bend an audience a certain way. Like how they perceive a topic or subject, or their opinion about a certain thing, be it interpersonal, nonverbal, written, or oral communication or public speaking. It is much common in daily life than one might realize, like on billboards and advertisements and in social media. They use visual techniques to convince the receiver to think and feel a certain way. Our thoughts and actions are influenced by what is around us, whether we are passively observing other people's behavior or actively complying with their requests.
We know that rhetoric is the art of persuasion, but how exactly is persuasion done? Let's discuss the three appeals of rhetoric or means of persuasion according to Aristotle. Ethos, pathos, and logos. To understand each appeal individually, we must first remember that persuasion, whether in the form of a speech or a written word, basically consists of three things: the rhetor, the subject, and the audience. Each of the three modes has its corresponding constituent, which is either the character of the rhetor, the disposition of the audience, or the argument itself. Ethos is the appeal that depends on the personal character of the rhetor. It refers to the perceived credibility of the rhetor. If the rhetor appears credible, then the audience is more likely to believe what they are saying. Now, what exactly makes a rhetor credible? According to Aristotle, a rhetor appears credible if they display three things. First, good sense or practical intelligence. Second, good moral character or virtue. And third, goodwill. If a rhetor does not fulfill the criteria, they will not appear credible. Let us go through some scenarios. If a rhetor displays none of the criteria, the audience will doubt their capability to give good advice. If the rhetor only shows good sense and not the others, the audience will doubt if the rhetor's aims are good. If the rhetor shows good sense and good moral character, but not goodwill, the audience will doubt if the rhetor is providing the best suggestion. The next appeal is pathos. Pathos is the appeal that depends on the disposition of the audience. It is said to be grounded on the emotions and psychology of the audience, and it involves putting the audience in a certain frame of mind. This works because emotions modify the judgment of the audience. A happy audience reacts differently compared to an angry audience. We know why emotion works, but how can the rhetor make the audience feel something? Aristotle's technique relies on knowledge on every significant emotion. If the rhetor is familiar with an emotion, they will be able to deduce circumstances in which a person will feel it. For example, in what state of mind they will feel it, towards whom or what they will feel it, and for what reason they will feel it. Once a rhetor has deduced these things, they will be able to highlight characteristics of the subject that are likely to provoke the desired emotion in the audience. It must be noted that the use of pathos requires audience analysis, as what works on a certain audience might not work on other audiences because different types of character have different dispositions to emotional response. The last appeal is logos. Logos is the appeal that depends on the argument itself. It is the apparent proof provided by the words itself, regardless of how credible the rhetor appears and what the audience feels. A persuasive interaction that is solid in terms of logos will be able to make the point clear to others through logic, reasoned discourse, and reasonable claims. It works when the audience comes to conclude that the rhetor's argument just makes sense. It is said that the most effective form of persuasion utilizes all three appeals, but it is not necessary for every act of persuasion to make use of all three appeals. Often, however, there is some element of each. In academic writing, ethos and logos are given more respect than pathos.
From the previous discussion, we know that there are three appeals of a rhetoric: ethos, logos, and pathos. More often than not, ethos is given spotlight in terms of how it can be used well. In relation to this, researchers in communication have long been trying to understand how ethos, from now on referred to as source credibility, works, and how one is perceived as credible. Such studies have developed different ways of measuring a speaker's credibility, from which the dimensions of credibility arose. So what are these dimensions of credibility? Dimensions of credibility are elements that factor into how a receiver of a message perceives the speaker. In other words, these dimensions of credibility are what a speaker must take note of in order to present himself as a credible source. Now, one may think, why do these dimensions matter? And why are they even studied? Studies show that even in normal, everyday interpersonal communication, source credibility is applied. Imagine that you are on the receiving end of a message. We know that in communication, information is passed on from the sender of the message to the receiver of the message. Now, imagine two scenarios. First, the sender of the message is an acquaintance. Second, the sender of the message is an expert. Both of them shared contrasting information. Who would you believe? Most people would choose to believe the expert instead of the acquaintance. Such is an example of ethos, or source credibility. This shows that even in our everyday lives, credibility is used and often relied on. Therefore, by identifying elements that increase one's credibility, speakers are able to present themselves as a better source of information. Throughout history, the dimensions of credibility have been changed and revised. Aristotle believed that credibility relies on intelligence, character, and goodwill. Today, however, a researcher devoted to the study of human communication, Mr. James C. McCroskey, determined what is acknowledged to be the most reasonable dimensions of credibility. We will be discussing competence, character, and composure. In order to identify the qualities that make one credible, McCroskey studied different people on how they perceive someone in a positive light. His research, entitled Image of Mass Media News Sources, co-written by Thomas A. Jensen, studied different people and what traits make one competent, composed, and of good character according to the audience. According to the paper, to be competent, one must appear qualified, an expert, reliable, believable, competent, intelligent, valuable, and informed. To have a good character, one must seem kind, sympathetic, unselfish, and virtuous. Lastly, to be composed, one must present themselves as composed, calm, relaxed, and poised. In other words, competence would mean the speaker's ability to appear to have high expertise on the topic, character would mean the ability to appear to have a good personality, and composure would mean the ability to physically appear as a reliable source of information. Such dimensions allow one to appear credible to his audience. Now, how do the dimensions of credibility relate to the appeals of rhetoric? How do these concepts apply to communication, specifically in rhetoric? It might not seem like it, but both of these concepts are very important in the communication process, functioning with similar roles but from different perspectives. Both are concepts that, to some extent, ensure that the information sent by the speaker is received and believed by the audience. Both are concepts that, to some extent, ensure that the information sent by the speaker is received and accepted by the audience. However, there is a technical difference between the appeals of a rhetoric and the dimensions of credibility. The appeals of a rhetoric focuses on what the speaker, or the sender of the message, does in order to ensure that his rhetoric is accepted. By applying these appeals, one is able to send a message with some sort of assurance that the information would be received and accepted by the audience. In other words, if one were to use ethos, pathos, and logos, then the information from the speaker in a rhetoric has a much higher chance of being accepted by the receivers due to the way that the speaker presented the information. On the other hand, the dimensions of credibility focuses on the audience. Because the dimensions of credibility looks at what traits one should have in order to look more credible, naturally, the focus lies on who judges the speaker's credibility. Thus, the dimensions of credibility focuses on how one should present himself in order to appear credible for the audience. In this manner, the audience would see the speaker as credible and would accept the information, particularly in rhetoric. The two concepts also have important roles in social media communication. Because information is plastered everywhere in social media, credibility and believability matters in order to appear as a reliable informational source. In order to effectively deliver information to people, especially in a rhetoric, one must apply ethos, pathos, and logos by appearing to have specific traits. In a sense, applying pathos allows the viewers or readers to sympathize and understand where the speaker is coming from. In order to do this, one must appear to have a good character, be kind, unselfish, and virtuous. Applying logos would mean that the sender of the message is giving factual information, giving the audience confidence to believe that the information given is true. In order to do this, the sender of the message must be competent, showing expertise and intelligence, among others, in order to effectively use logos. Lastly, using ethos would allow the audience to see that the source is credible, allowing the audience to easily trust the speaker. In order to do this, one must be composed, calm, and relaxed so as to appear credible for the audience. This matters in social media communication, where everyone can be a source of information. This will give the audience a way to filter out information to accept and information to disregard.
Rogers' Ayeta model stands for awareness, interest, evaluation, trial, and adoption. This was proposed by Everett Rogers in 1962 in his book Diffusion of Innovations. The Ayeta is a 5-step hierarchical process involved before a new idea is accepted or before a desired change within a social system is achieved. The model proposed 4 main elements that influence the spread of a new idea, which are communication, channels, innovation, time, and social system. According to Rogers, the first step in the Ayeta model is awareness. Before a group of people accepts an innovation, he or she must be aware of the existence of the innovation, resulting in the individual being exposed to the innovation. However, he or she lacks the information about it. Therefore, what the individual knows about the innovation or idea is only the surface, the basic knowledge about it. Some examples on how awareness is spread through mass media are teasers, which is a short introductory advertisement for a product, characterized by leaving the audience in suspense and anxiously waiting for more information on the innovation. Pioneering ads are introductory ads that create awareness. They are short and not detailed like TV commercials. Jingle slogans is a short, easily remembered slogan, verse, or tune, and the slogan is a short, memorable phrase used in advertising. The next process is interest, and Roger explained that at this stage, the individual begins to wonder if the idea or innovation holds some significance for him or her, therefore developing interest towards the idea or innovation. At this stage, the individual seeks for more information about the innovation in addition to the basic knowledge he acquired in the previous stage. It is also confirmed that the innovator has done enough persuasion through constant communication to spark the interest of the individual. Advertising methods for this are information ads, which are adverts that give an audience much information on a product or service. Image ads, where the advertisement uses the image of a celebrity or personality in promoting a product or service. Through the next step, evaluation, the individual examines and assesses the product relying on the information he or she acquired in the previous steps. Through this stage, the individual weighs the pros and cons of the product, after which the individual will decide if he or she would accept the product or reject it. The individual then asks himself if he has the ability and capabilities to own the innovation. Some examples of advertising used to influence the evaluation of an individual are testimonials, which are statements made by celebrities or personalities testifying to the benefits of using a product or service, and comparative ads, which compare 2 or more companies that offer similar products or services.
The next and fourth process is trial. During this stage, the individual tests the product to determine if he or she is satisfied. An example of this is the free samples we get from supermarkets, where small amounts of the product is given to customers for free. The fifth and final stage is adoption. According to Roger, at this stage, the individual is able to identify himself or herself with the product and therefore adopts it. Hence, he or she makes the decision to continue using the innovation up to its optimum potential. For example, for fast-moving consumables such as juice, you might come across new brands and immediately try it to see if it suits your tastes better. For example, for fast-moving consumables such as juice, you might come across new brands and immediately try it to see if it suits your tastes better. However, for more expensive items such as cell phones and desktop computers, it would take years of the 5-step hierarchical IETA methods before a decision is made. On the other hand, we have the CAP model or the KAP survey, which is used to reveal misconceptions or misunderstandings that may present obstacles to the activities that we would like to implement, and as well as potential barriers to behavioral changes. By learning of these misconceptions and barriers, a change in approach to better suit the target audience or receivers may be employed. KAP or CAP stands for Knowledge, Attitude, and Practice. One of the main purposes of this model is to enhance the knowledge, attitude, and practices of specific themes. Comparing the CAP model to the IETA model, the IETA model takes a more in-depth approach to communicating a concept but is one-way in nature, which means that the receiver cannot give his or her feedback to the sender of the message. On the other hand, the CAP model may not be as in-depth as the IETA model, but it takes into consideration the responses of the receivers or the audience.
The adoption curve model developed by Everett M. Rogers is also known as the diffusion of innovation theory. Who is Everett M. Rogers? Everett Rogers was a professor of communication studies. He popularized the diffusion of innovation theory or the adoption curve model in his book Diffusion of Innovations, which was first published in 1962 and is now in its 5th edition. He argues that diffusion is the process by which an innovation is communicated over time among the participants in a social system, wherein the origins of the diffusion of innovations theory are varied and span multiple disciplines. Adoption curve model, also known as diffusion of innovation theory, is one of the oldest social science theories which seeks to explain how, why, and at what rate new ideas and technologies spread. In this model, people tend to adopt new technologies at varying rates, wherein the relative speed of adoption follows a bell curve, with the primary differences being individuals' psychological disposition to new ideas. Diffusion of innovation theory originated in communication to explain how, over time, an idea or product gains momentum and diffuses or spreads through a specific population or social system. The end result is adoption, that people, as part of social system, adopt a new idea, behavior, or product. What is adoption? Adoption means that a person does something differently than what they had previously. For example, purchase or use of a new product and acquire and perform of a new behavior. The key to adoption is that the person must perceive the idea, behavior, or product as new or innovative. It is true that this diffusion is possible. Adoption of a new idea, behavior, or product, for instance, innovation, does not happen simultaneously in a social system. Rather, it is a process whereby some people are more to adopt the innovation than others. Elements that influence. In developing the idea of adoption curve model, Everett Rogers proposes that 4 main elements influence the spread of a new idea. These elements are the innovation itself, communication channels, time, and a social system. This process relies heavily on human capital. The innovation must be widely adopted in order to self-sustain. Within the rate of adoption, there is a point at which an innovation reaches critical mass. Adoption of a new idea is caused by human interaction through interpersonal networks. For instance, if the initial adopter of an innovation discusses it with 2 members of a given social system, and these 2 become adopters who pass the innovation along to 2 peers, and so on, the resulting distribution follows a binomial expansion. Expect adopter distributions to follow a bell-shaped curve over time. Researchers have found that people who adopt an innovation early have different characteristics than people who adopt an innovation later. Thus, when promoting an innovation to a target population, it is important to understand the characteristics of the target population that will help or hinder adoption of the innovation. There are 5 established adopter categories. which necessitates the understanding of the characteristics of the target population. Consequently, when promoting an innovation, there are different strategies used to appeal to different adopter categories. Adopter categorization. The criterion for adopter categorization is innovativeness. This is defined as the degree to which an individual is relatively earlier in adopting new ideas than the other members of the social system. Innovativeness is considered relative in that an individual has either more or less it than others in a social system. Adopter categories. Back to Rogers' research, we see that everyone will not immediately adopt a disruptive idea despite obvious benefits. Over years of research, Rogers identified some fascinating personality traits that help us organize how people will accept a new innovation. It turns out we approach innovations in the following ways. First category, innovators. Innovators comprises the 2.5% of the bell-shaped curve distribution of the adopter categories. These are people who want to be first to try the innovation. They are venturesome and interested in new ideas. These people are very willing to take risks and are often the first to develop new ideas. Very little, if anything, needs to be done to appeal this population. These people are also willing to accept the occasional setback when new ideas prove unsuccessful. For they are the first individuals to adopt an innovation, innovators usually are the ones who are willing to take risks, youngest in age, have the highest social class, have great financial lucidity, very social and have closest contact to scientific sources and interaction with other innovators. Risk tolerance has them adopting technologies which may ultimately fail. Financial resources help absorb these failures. Second category, early adopters. Early adopters comprises the 13.5% of the bell-shaped curve distribution of the adopter categories. These are people who represent opinion leaders for they enjoy leadership roles and embrace change opportunities. Usually, they are already aware of the need to change and so are very comfortable adopting new ideas. That is why strategies to appeal to this population include how-to manuals and information sheets on implementation. They do not need information to convince them to change as well. This category is the second fastest category of individuals who adopt an innovation. These individuals have the highest degree of opinion leadership among the other categories. Early adopters are typically younger in age, have a higher social status, have more financial lucidity, advanced education, and are more socially forward than late adopters. More discreet in adoption choices than innovators. Realize judicious choice of adoption which help them maintain central communication position. 34% of the group of adopters are composed of the early majority. These are the individuals who adopt an innovation after varying degree of time. They are described as people who are rarely leaders, but they do adopt new ideas before the average person. Although the time of adoption is significantly longer than the innovators and the early adopters, early majority individuals seldom lead, but they willingly follow in adopting innovations. Typically, they need to see evidences that the innovation works before they are willingly to adopt it. As the link between very early adopters and people late to adopt, early majority adopters play an important part in the diffusion process. To appeal to this population, strategies must include success stories and evidence of the innovation's effectiveness.
The fourth category is the late majority, with 34% of the adopters in the group. Individuals from the late majority are skeptical of change and will only adopt an innovation after it has been tried by the majority. They are typically skeptical about an innovation. Approaching it usually comes with a high degree of skepticism, and to appeal to this population, one must include information on how many other people have tried it and have adopted to it successfully. Adoption may be born out of economic necessity. While they may be persuaded about the utility of an innovation, there must be strong pressure from peers for individuals from the late majority to adopt. The last 16% of the adopters are labeled as the laggards. Individuals in this category are the last to adopt an innovation. These individuals typically have an aversion to change agents and tend to be advanced in age. They are described as people who are bound by tradition and are very conservative. They are very hesitant to change and are the hardest group to bring on board. This is because they are the most likely to have the lowest social status, lowest financial fluidity, and the oldest of all other adopters. Sometimes, an innovation finally adopted by a laggard may already be rendered obsolete by more recent ideas used by innovators. In order to persuade this population, strategies must include statistics, fear appeals, and pressure from people in the other adopter groups. The stages by which a person adopts an innovation and whereby diffusion is accomplished include the following. First is awareness. The individual is initially exposed to an innovation without actually knowing anything about it. During this stage, an individual seeks to find the need for the said innovation. The second stage is persuasion. The individual becomes interested in the innovation and actively looks for various information. Following persuasion is the decision to adopt the innovation. An individual takes the concept of the change and weighs the advantages and disadvantages of using the innovation. Afterwards, he decides to adopt or to reject the innovation. The next stage includes the initial use. An individual employs the innovation to a varying degree depending on the situation to test its usefulness. The individual finalizes his decision at the last stage, which is the confirmation. He or she decides to continue to utilize the said innovation. Given primarily the stages of adoption, we will also enumerate the 5 main factors that influence the adoption of an innovation, and how they have different extent in the 5 adopter categories. First factor to consider is a relative advantage. It is a degree to which an innovation is seen as better than the idea, program, or product it replaces. Next is compatibility, which refers to how consistent an innovation is with the values, experiences, and needs of the potential adopters. Another factor to be considered is the complexity of the innovation. The difficulty to understand and use an innovation affects its diffusion to the different adopter categories. Trialability, on the other hand, describes the extent to which the innovation can be tested or experimented with before a commitment to adopt is made. Lastly, the observability, or the extent to which the innovation provides tangible results, influences the adoption of different adopters to the innovation itself. According to Rogers, the diffusion model could be usefully applied to the process of socio-economic development. The diffusion approach was a natural framework in which to evaluate the impact of development programs in agriculture, family planning, public health, and nutrition. This theory has been used successfully in many fields, including communication, agriculture, public health, criminal justice, social work, and marketing. A good example for this would be its application to public health as related to our chosen field and career path. In public health, diffusion of innovation theory is used to accelerate the adoption of important public health programs that typically aim to change the behavior of a social system. For example, an intervention to address a public health problem is developed, and the intervention is promoted to people in a social system with the goal of adoption. The most successful adoption of a public health program results from understanding the target population and the factors influencing their rate of adoption. Given its applications in different fields, the adoption curve model has its own set of limitations. This includes its centricity to adoption, or what works for a certain category. It is bounded by its capability to work better with adoption of behaviors rather than cessation or prevention of behaviors. Moreover, it doesn't take into account an individual's resources or social support to adopt a new behavior or innovation.
Have you ever wondered why we feel a 5-pound weight to be lighter than 5 pounds after lifting a 10-pound weight, and a 5-pound weight to be heavier than 5 pounds after lifting a 2-pound weight? This is all because of the order of presentation in persuasion. The order of presentation in persuasion has the effectiveness of a communication which depends on a variety of factors. Among those concerning organization and procedure, the order of presentation forms one of the major factors that influence the impact of communication on an audience. Now, before we get to it, let me tell you more about its history. It is to Carl Hovland and his research team that the appropriate research questions and experimental designs have been developed to test the acknowledged to this effect. During the early 1900s and World War, especially in World War II, there was a heavy need for research on political persuasion as propaganda analysis and public opinion research. The research branch of the Army's Information and Education Division was deemed with this responsibility. Now, the importance of understanding methods behind changing public opinion was emphasized by the success of Nazi propaganda campaigns. Now, after the war had ended, Karl Hovland continued his research at Yale University in order to study the nature of persuasive communication. He found that effective persuasion could be achieved by focusing on who says what to whom. Again, who says what to whom. Now, he was also appointed as the chief psychologist and director of experimental studies for the U.S. War Department, along with others such as Francis J. Anderson, Arthur A. Lumsdaine, John L. Finnan, Nathan Macoby, Fred D. Sheffield, Irving L. Janis, Brewster Smith, and they undertook the responsibility of conducting, analyzing, and planning experiments that explored the effectiveness of war propaganda. The research resulted into finding that the effective persuasion could be achieved in focusing who says what to whom. Now for the definition of terms. First, order. Order refers to two aspects of variation. One, the order of presenting a series of communications, and two, the order of presenting the various elements within a single communication as defined by Hovland in 1957. Next is presentation. Presentation is an activity in which someone shows, describes, or explains something in a way that is arranged or designed to an individual or more, described by Merriam-Webster. Next is persuasion. Persuasion is the act of causing someone to do or believe in something. Now, according to the researchers, behavioral change, for example, living a healthier lifestyle or changing our buying habits cannot occur without attitude change having first taken place. To alter consumer or public attitudes, psychologists have developed the science of persuasion. Now, psychology or science of persuasion is the research of changing an audience's attitude through written, spoken, digital, filmed, or televised message. As you can see, this is the Yale Attitude Change Approach, also known as the Yale Attitude Change Model, following Karl Hovland's principle of who said what to whom, the source of communication, the nature of the communication, and the nature of the audience. According to this approach, many factors affect each component of a persuasive communication: the credibility and the attractiveness of the communicator or source, the quality of the sincerity of the message or nature of the communication, and the attention, intelligence, and age of the audience or nature of the audience can influence an audience's attitude change with a persuasive communication. Independent variables include the source, message, medium, and audience, with the dependent variable the effect or impact of the persuasion. So to explain the proper definition of the who in who says what to whom, we can talk about the effects of credibility. This relies on the aspects of the speaker to be of high trustworthiness or low trustworthiness. Prominent, credible speakers can drastically persuade more people than others who are not credible. Credible speakers also have a sense of reputation where what they say matters to whom they are speaking to. In addition, attractive speakers have stronger influence than those who are unattractive, regardless if the material is factual or not. Addition to those mentioned, the motive or intention of the speaker also gives that sense of confidence, which in some cases attracts audiences. As for technical aspects, the speed of the speech also showed effect to the audience, and where fast talkers are supposed to be more convincing. The similarity of the speaker to the audience also sets him or her apart from other speakers. This similarity creates a connection or bond with the audiences. Statements like, "I felt that too when I was doing this," gives relation to others, something for them to relate to. Next is what. What or the nature of the message. The characteristics of the nature of the communication impacts the degree of attitude change. One such characteristic is the design of the message. People tend to be more persuaded by messages that don't appear to be targeted for them. In regards to the structure of an argument, Hovland, Lumsden, and Sheffield explored the effectiveness of one-sided and two-sided messages. The study, referenced in Experiments on Mass Communications in 1948, looked at whether a message given to American soldiers would be more effective if it only advocated one position or if it advocated both sides of the position. It was found that two-sided messages were more effective on budging educated men's opinion. Additionally, two-sided arguments were also better at generating change of opinion in those soldiers who opposed the argument initially. For less educated men who also supported the government's position, the one-sided argument was more persuasive. Their findings not only suggested that the content of the communication has an impact on attitude change, but so do the attributions of the receiver. The issue of order of presentation is a complex one involving both learning and retention, and this is where primacy effect and recency effect matters. Primacy effect is when all things being equal, the first argument will be more effective. As for recency effect, all other things being equal, the last argument will be more effective. Dealing with primacy and recency effects results to inhibition and retention. By nature, there is a primacy effect that occurs with speakers. People are more influenced by what they hear first. The first speaker is recorded stronger than the following speakers, even if arguments following the first speaker are stronger, as long as there is little time between two communications. If there is a delay after every speech, retention will work better. It is better to go last because of the recency effect, where people remember the most recent event the most. An example is by Miller and Campbell simulated jury study, wherein our court system gives the prosecution the advantage of both primacy and recency effects. Next is whom. Attitude may change depending on the characteristics of the audience. Audiences that are distracted during the persuasive communication will often be persuaded less than audiences that are not distracted. From the ages of 18 to 25, people are very susceptible to attitude change. After those ages, people tend to be more stable and resistant to attitude change. Whom or nature of who is being persuaded gives also the level of intelligence or education as well as self-esteem. Additionally, an audience member that is less intelligent tends to be more persuadable than those with higher intelligence. People who do not enjoy thinking can rely on experts and trustworthy sources to conserve their cognitive resources. If the expert source is untrustworthy, then the person might have to evaluate the material on their own. In most cases, people are not knowledgeable enough to interpret the information themselves or have very low confidence in the issue. Thus, they must rely on the knowledge of others. In summary, the order of presentation studied by Carl Hovland helped the economy and the communicators at the time to identify the factors of how an idea or a speech can differ in result by its order of presentation. Time is the crucial variable in this model, and that primacy and recency effect may be used to aid the speaker's success, to persuade the audience, and create an action or opinion change.